If you have ever sat down on that park bench with Forrest, or felt your heart skip a beat when the pure white feather drifted across the Savannah sky, then perhaps Forrest Gump is not just a movie. For our generation, it is a part of the stream of memories. But let us temporarily forget the lesson about life being like a box of chocolates for a moment. Have you ever wondered what truly created that magic? Not everything was in the script. Sometimes the rejected names, the accidental falls on set, or the wildly spontaneous decisions became the soul of the film. I still remember the first time I realized Tom Hanks was not acting, he was becoming Forrest. And the small details, like the way he delivered his classic lines, were actually a fascinating backstage accident. Today, let us open the production diary of 1994. We will not talk about dry box office numbers, but rather 15 secrets and accidents that turned an ordinary cinematic work into an irreplaceable cultural legacy. Sit back, sip a cup of coffee, and let nostalgia guide us back to the Alabama of those days. 1. The extremely dark and adult original novel. If you only know Forrest Gump through the emotional cinematic version with the gentle smile of Tom Hanks, this truth might completely shock you. Because Forrest Gump in the original novel is almost an entirely different person. In the memory of millions of American viewers, Forrest is a symbol of innocence, kindness, and sincerity in the midst of a chaotic world. He is the type of character that makes people feel at ease every time they rewatch the movie on a quiet evening. But the book version by Winston Groom goes in a much weirder and darker direction. Forrest in the original work not only smokes marijuana and speaks extremely profanely, but also becomes a professional wrestler, wanders through a series of crazy situations, and even flies into space with an orangutan. It sounds more like a fever dream than the warm movie we used to know, right? And that is exactly why Hollywood changed this character almost entirely. The movie whitewashed Forrest into a gentler, more relatable person, and perhaps that very decision turned Forrest Gump into a timeless cinematic legend. 2. The slap in the face to Hollywood by the author of the novel. After all the controversies surrounding money and Hollywood accounting, perhaps the most interesting thing is that Winston Groom did not choose to stay silent. He did not go on television to create a scandal. He did not write angry interviews. Instead, he responded to Hollywood with exactly what created Forrest Gump in the first place, a book. And that response was extremely biting. When releasing the sequel titled Gump & Co., Winston Groom opened the book with a sentence that, to this day, many still consider a direct slap in the face of the American film industry. Forrest opens the story with the message, "Never let anyone make a movie about your life." Just one short sentence, but behind it is a whole lot of bitterness that those who know the behind-the-scenes story understand well. Because while Forrest Gump became a global phenomenon, making hundreds of millions of dollars and turning many people into Hollywood legends, the very author who created this character felt betrayed by the system. What makes this moment special is that it is both funny and sad in a very Forrest Gump way. A slight smile, but behind it is a lot of bitterness that Hollywood usually does not want the audience to see. 3. Many black stars boycotted the role of Bubba. Today, a lot of viewers remember Bubba in Forrest Gump as a character who is both funny and pitiful, with his endless presentation about different types of shrimp becoming an iconic part of the movie. The friendship between Forrest and Bubba is also one of the most sincere relationships in the entire story. But behind that role, there once existed a rather large controversy that many people have never heard of. Before the role of Bubba went to Michael T. Williamson, many famous black artists in America were invited to join the project. Among them were Ice Cube, Dave Chappelle, and David Alan Grier. But the surprise is that they all refused. According to many later interviews, some felt the character of Bubba was written too stereotypically, the kind of foolish, simple, and shallow image of black people that Hollywood had repeated for decades. To them, this role was not just about humor on screen, but also touched upon how the American film industry once viewed the black community. What makes this story interesting is that over time, a lot of audiences look at Bubba in a completely different way, a loyal, kind, and humane friend. And that is also the special thing about Forrest Gump, the same character, but each generation of audiences sees a different meaning. 4. The deceptive trick of Hollywood accounting. When mentioning Forrest Gump, most audiences remember an emotional, inspiring movie that brought in massive revenue worldwide. The movie not only won a series of Oscars, but also became a cultural icon of the 90s. But behind that halo, there exists a controversial story that many viewers never knew. And the most shocking thing is that the person who suffered the most might actually be Winston Groom, the author who created Forrest Gump in the first place. According to the agreement, he was promised a percentage of the profits of the movie. It sounds great, right? A movie earning nearly $700 million must surely bring a huge sum of money to the author. But Hollywood sometimes does not operate the way people think. Through what many call Hollywood accounting, a famously controversial accounting practice in the film industry, the studio reported that Forrest Gump, in fact, took a loss. That is right. One of the most successful movies in history was recorded as having no profit. And when this truth came out, it stunned a lot of people. 5. The mother of Forrest is only 10 years older than him. There are behind-the-scenes facts that once you know, you can no longer watch the movie the same way. And the story between Tom Hanks and Sally Field in Forrest Gump is definitely one of them. In the movie, Sally Field plays the mother of Forrest, a gentle, strong woman who is almost the emotional heart of the whole story. She makes the audience absolutely believe that she is a mother who sacrificed her whole life to protect her special son. But in real life, she is only exactly 10 years older than Tom Hanks. That sounds weird enough already, right? But what makes this Hollywood story even crazier is that just a few years before Forrest Gump, the two of them played characters with a romantic relationship in Punchline. That is right, going from on-screen lovers to mother and son in just a few short years. To many viewers today, this is a very clear example of how Hollywood at that time often aged actresses faster than actors. But at the same time, it also shows the amazing talent of Sally Field. Because despite the very small age gap, she still made the whole world believe she was the mother who raised Forrest with all the love possible. And honestly, it is very hard to imagine Forrest Gump being so emotional without the warmth that Sally Field brought to every movie scene. 6. Tom Hanks was severely injured on set. On screen, the scene of Forrest running across America always brings a feeling of freedom, healing, and is almost poetic. A man quietly running through the desert, mountains, and endless roads as if he is trying to leave all his sadness behind. That is one of the most iconic images of Forrest Gump. But in real life, the process of filming these scenes was much harsher than what audiences imagined. According to behind-the-scenes stories, Tom Hanks had to run back and forth for many days under severe weather to complete the scenes. Continuous filming caused him to be severely dehydrated, exhausted, and his feet blistered to the point of bleeding. There were times when the medical team had to intervene directly on set because his physical condition began to exceed safe limits. The remarkable thing is that Tom Hanks still continued filming. Perhaps that is why the running steps of Forrest on screen always feel very real. It is not the polished movie running usually seen in Hollywood. Viewers can feel the exhaustion, loneliness, and a very strange willpower inside the character. And who knows, maybe those real pains unintentionally created one of the most memorable cinematic journeys in American history. 7. The dark pedophilic past of the family of Jenny. When mentioning Forrest Gump, many people often remember the warm feeling, the inspiring quotes, and the almost healing innocence of Forrest. But looking closer, this movie also contains very heartbreaking dark spots that when young, many viewers might not have been old enough to truly understand. And perhaps no character carries more silent trauma than Jenny Curran. In the movie, the story of the childhood of Jenny is only briefly mentioned, with a few short narratives and a few very light scenes. There are no direct images. There are no heavy dialogues, but that very silence makes everything much more haunting. The movie reveals that the father of Jenny abused her and her sister when they were young, an extremely dark detail for a nostalgic movie watched by many American families together for years. And then there is the moment two children run away, hugging each other in the middle of a cornfield, praying to God to turn Jenny into a bird so she could fly far away from that house. That is a very short scene, but for many adult viewers, it is one of the most heartbreaking segments of the entire movie. Perhaps that is why Jenny always lives like a lost person. Forrest Gump never directly said everything on screen, but sometimes the very things the movie leaves unsaid are what make the viewers ache the longest. 8. The studio almost threw away the script because they believed this was a box office bomb. Today, it is hard to imagine anyone ever looking at Forrest Gump and thinking this movie would fail. But the truth is, before becoming one of the most beloved works in Hollywood history, Forrest Gump was once seen as a highly risky gamble that no studio really wanted to touch. In the late 80s and early 90s, Hollywood was chasing big action movies, explosive blockbusters, and easy-to-sell stories. As for Forrest Gump, a movie about a slow, naive young man wandering through decades of American history with strange conversations and quiet emotions. To many studio executives at that time, this idea did not sound commercial at all. According to many behind-the-scenes sources, Warner Brothers once rejected the script and believed the movie could become a box office disaster. Some even compared the risk of Forrest Gump to Rain Man, a movie they thought was too difficult to reach mass audiences. And that is the most interesting thing about Hollywood. Sometimes the movies considered as things nobody wants to watch are exactly the works that make the whole world remember for decades later. Forrest Gump almost did not exist, just because a few guys in suits thought the audience would not be patient enough to love a person who was too sincere. 9. Part 2 was canceled due to the September 11th tragedy. After the massive success of Forrest Gump, many viewers believed that Hollywood would definitely make a sequel. And actually, that almost happened. A Part 2 called Gump & Co. was not only conceptualized, but the script was almost completed. Tom Hanks was also ready to return to his iconic role. But then American history changed in just one morning. What makes this story chilling lies in the timing. The script for Part 2 was completed on September 10th, 2001. And exactly one day later, America was shaken by the September 11th attacks. Everything changed instantly. The mood of the country, public psychology, and even the way Hollywood looked at entertainment stories. According to what was revealed later, the sequel to Forrest Gump was expected to take Forrest through many political upheavals and even terrorist-related plots. But after the September 11th tragedy, the project suddenly became too sensitive, too dark, and no longer suitable for America at that time. And since then, Part 2 of Forrest Gump quietly disappeared, like a memory that never became reality. 10. The truth about the incurable disease of Jenny. Perhaps for many years, one of the saddest mysteries of Forrest Gump is the disease that took Jenny Curran away. The movie never explicitly stated the name of the disease. Jenny only mentioned that she had a virus in the early 80s, exactly the period when America started sinking into the fear named HIV/AIDS. And because of that, most viewers almost assumed that Jenny died of AIDS, especially when looking at her rebellious, wandering, and self-destructive life in the movie. But the interesting thing is that many years later, Winston Groom revealed completely different information in the sequel Gump & Co. According to him, Jenny actually died from hepatitis C, a disease that, at the time, was not well understood and was often confused with many other viruses. This surprised many fans, because for decades, audiences had interpreted the fate of Jenny in their own way. But perhaps the most heartbreaking thing is not the name of the disease. It lies in the fact that Jenny seemed to have spent her whole life running away from childhood traumas, only to finally realize her only peaceful place was always Forrest. And that is also the very typical tragedy of Forrest Gump. The movie never tries to make viewers cry with grand dialogues. It just quietly leaves the sadness there and then lets the audience feel it in their own way. 11. Tom Hanks had to pay out of pocket to save the movie. There is one thing that many viewers do not realize when watching Forrest Gump, which is that some of the most iconic moments of the movie almost never existed. And the reason was not because of bad ideas, but simply because Hollywood thought they were too expensive. Today, it is hard to imagine Forrest Gump without the scene of Forrest running across America with a long beard, empty eyes, and crowds of people silently following behind. It is not just a movie scene. It has almost become a cultural symbol of American cinema in the 90s. But at the time of production, Paramount Pictures viewed this scene as a huge expense that needed to be cut. And that was when Tom Hanks and director Robert Zemeckis made a very bold decision. Instead of letting the studio remove important segments, both agreed to pay out of their own pockets to continue filming. Not only the cross-country running scene, but also some intense segments at the Vietnam battlefield, scenes that later became the most powerfully emotional part of the movie. The interesting thing is that sometimes the greatest cinematic moments exist, just because a few people absolutely refused to give them up. 12. The name of Forrest originated from a Ku Klux Klan boss. There are details in Forrest Gump that when watching the movie as a child, most audiences just laughed and ignored. But when growing up and understanding more about American history, many people realized that a few moments in the movie are actually much darker than they thought. And one of the most controversial examples is the origin of the name Forrest. In the movie, the mother of Forrest once explained that he was named after Nathan Bedford Forrest, a real figure in American history. He was once a Southern general after the Civil War, but what makes this name extremely sensitive is that he was also considered the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, a notorious racist organization in American history. The strange thing is that the movie handled this detail with a very gentle, almost naive kind of humor. The mother of Forrest said that sometimes people do strange things, and that is why Forrest bears that name. With many viewers, this is just a passing line of dialogue. But to quite a few film critics and historians, it is an extremely sensitive detail, because it turns a very dark part of history into a light satirical element in a nostalgic movie. And that is also what makes Forrest Gump still debated today. Behind the warmth and gentleness of the movie, there always exist layers of meaning much more complex than its outward appearance. 13. Legendary rapper Tupac Shakur once auditioned for the role of Bubba. There are what-ifs in Hollywood history that make people curious for decades. And with Forrest Gump, one of the most interesting questions is probably what would happen if Bubba was played by Tupac Shakur. Today, Tupac is remembered as an immortal icon of American hip-hop culture, a rapper with a rebellious, fierce, but also deeply emotional and profound image. But in the early 90s, before becoming a legend, Tupac was still trying his hand at acting and looking for big roles in Hollywood. And what many audiences do not know is that he once auditioned for the role of Bubba. This information makes many movie fans feel extremely curious, because it is hard to imagine how the strong energy and very street personality of Tupac would blend into the innocent and quiet world of Forrest Gump. Especially when the character of Bubba at that time was also causing controversy because of the way black characters were portrayed in the movie. In the end, Tupac was not chosen. The role went to Mykelti Williamson, who later created a Bubba that was both humorous and full of emotion. But just thinking about the fact that Tupac almost appeared in Forrest Gump is enough to make this movie weird in a very Hollywood way. 14. Physical torture while filming the nude scene. When remembering Jenny Curran, many people often think of the melancholic moments, the girl with eyes that always seem to be looking for a place to belong. But there is one scene in the movie that many American viewers still remember forever. Jenny, standing on a small stage, only holding a guitar to cover her body, singing in the dim light in front of the noisy guests below. That is a very short scene in Forrest Gump. But behind those few minutes on screen is an extremely harsh experience for Robin Wright. According to many behind-the-scenes stories, Robin Wright had to film this segment continuously for nearly 24 hours. What is worse is that at that time, she had a very bad cold, her body was completely exhausted, but she still had to stand under the stage lights for many hours to complete every camera angle. And perhaps that very real exhaustion unintentionally made the scene heartbreakingly authentic. Because Jenny in that moment no longer looked like a rebellious girl. She looked like a lost, fragile person who had almost exhausted her life energy. The special thing about Forrest Gump is that the movie always hides the greatest pains behind very quiet moments. There is no overly tragic music. There are no lengthy speeches. It is just a girl standing on a stage trying to smile while her life is slowly breaking apart. 15. The psychological obsession of the actor playing Lieutenant Dan Among all the characters of Forrest Gump, perhaps no one changed as much as Lieutenant Dan Taylor. From a hot-tempered officer, full of anger at his fate, to the man who finally found his peace again, the journey of Lieutenant Dan made millions of American veterans deeply empathize. And what makes this role even more special is that emotion does not only exist on screen. To prepare for the role, Gary Sinise spent a lot of time meeting real-life veterans, especially those who lost limbs after the war. He listened to their stories, observed how they faced pain, anger, and the feeling of being abandoned after returning from the battlefield. According to Gary Sinise, those meetings affected him more strongly than anything he had ever imagined. It was no longer simply researching the role. It became a true emotional obsession. And perhaps that is why Lieutenant Dan on screen looks so real. Viewers do not just see a fictional character. They see the image of thousands of real-life American veterans, people returning from the war with wounds that sometimes never heal. After the movie, Gary Sinise spent decades supporting the veteran community through the Gary Sinise Foundation. And to many Americans, that is the most beautiful legacy that Forrest Gump left behind outside of cinema. As the final frames came to a close, I realized that Forrest Gump is not simply an excellent cinematic piece, but more like an old friend, someone who is always there to remind us of sincerity in a volatile world. It is the backstage incidents or the accidental moments we just reviewed that unintentionally carved out an imperfect yet deeply human beauty. Perhaps the life of each of us is just like Forrest, sometimes walking without a purpose, but accidentally touching upon greatness. Thank you for traveling back in time with me to appreciate each of these tiny pieces. If Forrest Gump is also a memorable part of your youth, please leave a comment. See you again on our upcoming nostalgic cinematic journeys.